Well, Brian, thank you for having me round to your house.
Would you like a cup of soup or something? Yeah.
Maybe a little later we can have a cup of soup. That'd be nice. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll do that.
It's the whole concept behind this series, as I told you, was I'm privy to such incredible people, and I feel like these stories have been told, and these relationships, and especially with you, you've told 1,000 stories and entertained 1 million people, and everybody laps it up every time, and every time you're talking, you're at Amelia or wherever, I'm always thinking to myself, God, I've never actually sat down with you and talked on my own. It's always been as part of a group. So I thought that was one of the motivations. And so I bought your book.
Mm.
Really great. I said to David Hobbs, I bought his book, and I said, David, I would have given you so much more respect if I'd actually read this, right from the outset. But I was. I read it obviously, and I was enjoying it because the way you had it laid out, the way you went through it, is exactly how I was waiting for the stories about, the honest stories about the danger that everyone went into, because people skirt around it, don't they, a little bit?
They do, yes.
And it wasn't anything to be skirted around because it was massively omnipresent in your life. Would you say for the whole of your career?
Yes. Well, yeah, pretty well.
Because the car started getting safe when you stopped.
Well,
Safer, don't you think?
Professional year was 1989.
Okay, yeah.
By
So they were
which
pretty
time,
safe
of
by
course,
then.
the cars,
monocoques
and much safer. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you? Obviously, you wear the scars on your face of injury, and your body got wrapped up around. You got badly hurt, didn't you? And
several times.
Several times, yeah.
Yes.
Do you Do you wear do you consider them the marks of the trade, or was it because some drivers walk through the woods like my dad, and he did get burnt in the Le Mans movie, but some drivers never got touched.
No, I think your dad is one of them.
Yeah,
David
he
Hobbs.
is. David Hobbs. Well, David did point out that you said he was never going fast enough.
Well, it's a matter of luck, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
That's what it is. The first big accident in 1968 with the Cooper Formula One car, the right front suspension broke, and I had no steering and no brakes, and so that was an enormous accident. Went right into the corner workers post and hit a parked car, which if I didn't hit the parked car, I would have run into the trees. But it was a scene from hell because 3 wheels came off the Cooper. I've got a compound fracture of the right forearm. One of the wheels hit a corner worker who was badly injured. He had a ruptured spleen. And then he had a heart attack. And so the whole scene, of course, it caught fire. So, there's fire, there's smoke, there's fire extinguisher powder. And suddenly a face appeared in front of me like this. And he's got a cigarette in his mouth trying to undo my seatbelt. So it all blew up again. But anyway.
It's surreal.
So it was a scene.
Surreal. Because I never, fortunately, touch wood, maybe I wasn't going fast enough. We all had accidents, but I always think it's about accidents that also have ended terminally for friends of ours over the years. Your brain inside your helmet is not accepting defeat, is it? It's not going, do you think all the way through you're naturally fighting the situation?
Yes.
And you walk out the other end. But there are people that didn't walk out the other end. And there's a moment that it must just shut off. Do you remember much of, is it clear? Is it like a movie?
Well,
is it like a movie?
There's no doubt that, let's take that accident at Spa with the
Yeah.
broken arm. I never lost consciousness, so I was conscious throughout the accident, but it's like a dream. It was all like slow motion and a dream. I felt my arm break as it got caught between the car and the barrier.
Yeah.
I didn't feel anything.
No.
And then I'm on the ground, eventually dragged out of the coupe, and there's still people shouting and screaming. And there was an English photographer standing above me, looking down at me, and I'm shouting, this effing steering broke.
Yeah.
And he's just staring at me, like this, nothing. And then, they give you painkilling injections, off to the hospital by helicopter.
Yeah.
And Ferdinand Orban was the head of surgery at the University of Liège Teaching Hospital.
Yeah.
And he'd been a Winston Churchill aide in World War II.
Wow.
So there were no specialists in those days. No. And they didn't have the magic fasteners, that they have today. That when he got me on the table and he's ready to operate, and this is probably 4 hours after the accident, because he'd been attending to the corner worker who was injured. And he said, Monsieur Redman, it may not be possible to save the heart. I smiled. I said, thank you, Professor. And he says, why are you smiling? I said, because I'm here. And so I felt that there was some, divine, not divine really, but something trying to stop me racing. Because I'd only just got to the top.
Yeah.
No, I'd started in 1959 and now it's 1968. But it was only...
Here I was born.
Yeah, it was only... Literally, I'd only just got with John Wire Automotive Engineering, the best long-distance driver.
You'd reached your top pinnacle.
And driving Formula One as well.
Yeah.
And so finished third, but only because everybody else broke down in the Spanish Grand Prix, my second Formula One race. And this is only my third Formula One race. And the week before, I'd finished second to Jochen Rindt in a Formula 2 race at Crystal Palace. And the week before that, we'd
But that race,
Spa.
you beat everyone in that Formula 2. There's a lot of people on that grid, weren't there? So you must have been feeling at that point on top of the world, like, I'm the real deal.
Yes. And then, after the accident, of course, I'm at home in Colne, Lancashire, near Burnley, where I was born. And Marion said to me, the only time she ever said anything about my racing, she said, I'd like you to stop racing, darling.
Wow.
And I said, I'm not stopping.
Those are
She's
tough
never
words.
said another word since.
Really?
And we're still married 60 years later.
Isn't it wild? God. I think the danger element is, as a child, I remember going into dad and mum's room on a Monday morning or Sunday, and they would be in tears, or my mum would be in tears because so-and-so had died at a track, which made it incredibly personal and relevant for my mother. And the first generation, I talked to Dad about this, you guys were away doing it. As the kid, like your son James, we were at home with the feminine side of the relationship, seeing the kind of aftermath of all this, which meant that when I decided to go racing, it wasn't because I liked autosport and I glamorized it. It was quite, based on really wanting to do it. I saw that side of it, and I also saw Dad's resilience and the way you tucked it away in a place that you guys, we all have in our mind, lock it away. Not happening to me. Back next week.
Yes, but places like Spa and Le Mans in the 917 in 1970, I knew how weak the chassis was. I'd seen them break in half.
Yeah.
And so when I was at Spa, I know drivers say, well, I really thought I'm going to be killed.
Really?
Lie that Saturday night before the race, I'd lie there, perspiration running down my forehead, thinking tomorrow I'm gone. I told David Hobbs
fear
once.
was real for you.
Yes.
Fear was real.
Yes.
Do you think everyone
David
admits
Hobbs
that?
once, and he said, "You what?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I thought this is it. Tomorrow I'm gone." And he said, "Well, if I'd thought that, I would never have done it."
Really? Isn't it weird how we all process it different? So if you had to define fear for you, fear means what to you?
I don't know. Something to battle.
Huh.
Fear is something to battle, like many other things in life, many challenges in life.
Yeah. How do you balance that with risk? Because risk is something you took to combat that fear. Isn't it weird? You had the fear, but you had to take risk.
Yes, you had.
Regardless.
If you didn't want to do it, there's 100 people waiting to take your place.
That's what I always
when
thought.
the Targo Florio accident in the 983 in 1971, I'd retired. I'd gone from the best long-distance team in the world, John Wire Automotive Engineering, the factory Porsche 917, and you may recall this, but your dad, Derek, took my place in the team.
Yeah.
I came back from South Africa after 4 months of retirement, Now I don't have a drive. Sid Taylor, a well-known entrant who I'd driven for in a Lola T70 Mark 3B in 1969, he said drive this McLaren Formula 5000 cars. But then, in April, I got a call from John Wire. Hello, Redman, how are you? Very well, thank you, John. Would you care to do the Targo Florio? Derek's never done it, and, you won it last year with Sifford. So I said, great, back into the big time. So off we go. Well, Sifford crashed the car pretty hard the day before the race on the left front, and it was repaired overnight. And very unusually, John Wire said to me on race day morning, Redman, we'd like you to start the race. I said, what for? He said, I don't want Sifford and Rodriguez knocking each other off. So I started, and the handling right from the start wasn't normal. And just before, when I was sitting in the car waiting to leave, a German engineer said to me, Herr Edman, if you must have the accident, do not crash on the right side. So I get 22 miles round the 44-mile circuit. I turn for a relatively easy corner, nothing. Steering broke. And I hit a stone kilometre post right in the fuel tank. It exploded. And so I held my breath, shut my eyes. I hit the belt release, stood up, and just jumped. I couldn't see. I was on fire, soaked in fuel, on fire from head to foot. And then I just fell on the ground. Well, spectators, by this time I'm blind, I couldn't see from the fire. Yeah. Spectators took my overalls off and were fanning me with magazines and newspapers. It took 45 minutes before the helicopter arrived.
Right.
Now I'm somewhere that nobody knows where I am. No. And Alain de Cadenet was brought in a couple of hours later. And I couldn't see, and I'm bandaged from head to foot. And Alan's favourite story, which I'm going to repeat because if I don't, he will, was that I had to ask him for assistance passing water because my hand was bandaged. I couldn't get at anything. So about 10 o'clock that night, Richard Atwood and Pedro Rodriguez found me. Nobody knew where I was. Took me back to the Porsche hotel.
So when they say you found you, you were by the road, effectively?
They didn't know where I was. I was actually in a
little hospital somewhere.
Yeah, it wasn't a proper hospital. It was one, there were no doctors hardly, just, families looking after patients. And so, anyway, they took me back to the hotel. There was a German doctor there, and he gave me painkilling.
Were you in pain? You must have been beforehand. No.
And then Gulf and Porsche rented a jet out of Geneva to take me back to England. And, of course, John and Totty Wire and Richard Atwood hitched a lift. And the main burns unit in England was closed for infection, so they took me to Manchester, which was good, because I lived, an hour and a half away. And there, the surgeon, who was another World War II plastic surgeon, and he did another, fantastic job, really.
That's quite incredible when you think about again, back to like I was saying, the difference between you remembering the burns and on this planet or in the next world is a minuscule moment.
I mean, that was really...
That was tough, wasn't it?
I was so lucky to get out. Yeah. We're talking about fractions of a second, I think.
What happened to the car?
The car was completely destroyed. Nothing left.
Nothing.
About 10 years ago, I saw Gerard Larousse, who was also driving a 9083 for Martini. And he said, Brian, when I pass your car on the Targo Florio, I am very worried. And I said, yes, I was pretty worried as well. He says, you know what was left from the accident? I said, no. He says, nothing. He said, there was a hole in the road, and inside the hole was the crankshaft.
Good. Often when you do seminars and stuff, which is fun, right? The seminars around the big events, it's nice. I mean, they've become very popular with all the Concours goers, haven't they? They like to hear everyone talk in a row and different perspectives. I liked that one at Amelia. I really liked hosting the Porsche one a couple of years ago at 962s, and really, I enjoy it. But you often talk about the 917, like when you first saw it and you first heard it. It wasn't an auspicious beginning, was it? To to
Well, it
the
wasn't-
success of the car.
No, I mean, in March 1969, I got a call from Porsche. Herr Redman, you will come to Weissach and test the new 917. Well, at that time, there were 10 drivers, 6 Germans, 3 English, Vic Elford, Richard Atwood and myself, and 1 Swiss, Joseph. Oh, why do they want me? I'm up in Cone, Lancashire, and they've got 6 German heroes, ready to die for the fatherland, not very far. So I said, I call you back in 30 minutes. I see if I can change my business arrangements. Please be sure to call Herr Redman. I said, I will. So I called Joe Sifford in Switzerland. I said, have you tested, the new 917 yet? There's a long silence. He says, no, Brian, he said, we let the others find out what breaks first. So I couldn't go. I didn't go. So, no, that winter of 69, I mean, Sifford and I won 5 of the 10 races in the 908 in 69. At that time, the 917 was slowly being brought in. They were trying it,
Yeah.
I mean, the very first race for it was Spa in 1969, so that would have been about May.
Yeah.
And there were 2 of them there. And Sifford went out in the one we had, and he set the fastest lap, actually, in practice. But then he came in, he said, no, we drives a 908.
Really? He said, no.
So it was raining, and Herr Bott, head of engineering, was there, and he said, Brian, try the 917. I said, but it's raining, Herr Bott. Yeah, go out, drive slowly. So I get in it, my first time ever in it. Well, talk about uncomfortable. My head's on the roof, my knees are up against the back of the wheel. So, Christ, so boom, I start it.
Yeah.
And I look, I see a switch that says wiper, and it's a huge wiper, it's like this. And it's on the left. I turned it, and the wiper just went, flew off into the pits. So I got out, I turned it off and got out. Then my boss says, Brian, what are you doing? I said, yeah, but look, the wiper's come off. He said, go out and drive slowly. So out I went and drove pretty slowly.
With the 917, I remember Dad drove me around the streets of Coventry where there was like a demonstration thing.
Yeah.
And I was very young, and he drove me around. And I was just, it was just a demonstration. I remember being very impressed as a kid. And then as a much older adult, sitting inside, after my racing career, sitting inside, a real one. I think it was the Collier one. I guess the Colliers have one, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So I remember sitting inside theirs, and for me, as you look around at a racing car when it's stationary, its race days are done, and it's calm and it's beautifully restored, and that's the thing with historics, right? They're so perfectly restored, and you think this was such a violent car, but when it sat there, and I looked at the rivets, and I looked at the simple little gearbox and the tiny steering wheel for compared to what we're used to now, the lack of dials, the lack of controls, I mean the lack of information, but 246 miles an hour on the Mulsanne.
And the long tail version,
the long tail.
yes, which we actually never drove, but
like a silent but violent machine.
Yes,
How do you feel when you see these cars and you go to Amelia and everyone's like, oh, Brian, you used to drive this, and it's all tarted up and it's all it's like you used to do battle as a gladiator in these things, and it's now in the hands of someone else. They were very purposeful racing cars, weren't they?
Yes,
all you want to do is go fast.
Well, it was built, of course, in a tremendous rush when the FIA CIS changed the rules from 50 to 25 production cars. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And so Porsche knew about this, because Hunschke von Hanstein, who was the team manager, he was on the commission there. And so it was really a copy of the long-tail 908, except it was 4.5 litres, actually, when it first came out, because it used the same pistons and valves and everything from the 908. But it's an absolute tribute, to Porsche engineering, that they turned this really awful race car into one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
And today it's revered as, as the greatest long-distance sports car of all time. And it's all Ferdinand Piëch, who was so strong and powerful. He nearly financially ruined Porsche through those racing efforts.
Yeah.
And you don't read much about it, but it was
No, you
all
don't, do you?
Piech. And the brilliance of the engineers,
Yeah.
who were unbelievable. But he would, if let's take a Lola T70 Mark 3B, same year, a much better car. It didn't have the engine, because the Chevrolet 5-litre, which was the maximum size at that time, gave an unreliable 475 horsepower in those days. And it wasn't reliable. The Porsche, as it came out in 69, with 4.5-litre, gave 575 horsepower. And it was reliable. And then, next year, 1970, it goes to 6-litre, to 5-litre full, and it's 620 horsepower.
It's a lot, isn't
No
it?
competition.
No competition.
Yes. Yeah.
You sit here in Vero Beach and you think back about the drivers. You've driven with some incredible humans, haven't you? Great drivers, but also great humans.
Yes.
Like Joe Siffert was,
Yes.
he was a great man, wasn't he? A great.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, just from what I got to know his son quite well, and Dad always talks very highly of him. What were the moments in between like? Because obviously racing is the known side of it. What were dinners like with him? What was your personal interaction like with him?
Well, it was very good, but he was a very, active guy in every front, whether it was the ladies or business or changing cars or everything. He was non-stop.
Was he?
He was unbelievable. Now, what happened was, after the accident in 68 with my arm, in September of that year, 1968, I started driving again. The hospital in Burnley said, they took one x-ray and said it was okay. So off I go to Chevron in Bolton, and I do a run at Aintree, and Derek Bennett, the owner of Chevron, said, do you want to do the South African Springbok Series? So it was Kyalami 9 hours, Cape Town 3 hours, Lorenzo Mark 3 hours, Bulawayo 3 hours, etc., etc. So I did all these, but coming back from Bulawayo through Johannesburg, my arm wasn't feeling all that great, and so I rang Alex Blichtnout, who was the organiser of a Formula One race in the 9 hour.
Yeah.
I said, Alex, do you know any good bone men, in the Johannesburg area? He said, yes, Brian, man, I know the Christian Barnard of the bone world. Well, Christian Barnard was the heart surgeon.
Yeah.
So I go to see David Raw on a Friday afternoon, and he took 20 x-rays, and he said, sit down, Brian, man, I've got 2 bits of bad news for you. I said, what? He said, the first is you don't have any union of either bone in the forearm. Ooh. I said, what? I said, what's the second? He said, I'm going on holiday tomorrow. Oh. So I said, I've just signed a contract with Porsche. I have to be at Daytona in 6 weeks' time. He said, I try an experiment that may work and it may not. And the next morning, he opened my arm up from my wrist to my elbow. He took bone out of my hip and glued it into my forearm.
What?
He didn't put it in plaster. He said, don't use it till you have to. So I arrived at Daytona 6 weeks later, took the sling off, and I drove, with one hand. With my 908, my arm
Fishing
like
out,
this,
yeah.
resting this hand.
Trying not to expose the weakness to the team.
I was thinking, I thought, boy, it's going to be tough. And so at about 8 in the evening, the first of the 5 factory 908s came in the pits, the engine misfiring. And the engineers examined it. They said, we are finished. They will all break. We were out by midnight, saved by the bell.
Isn't that wild?
So,
Yeah, God. David told me to I ask you, he said, because I was asking him about, we were just this morning talking about you, and he said, Joe Siffert and him, he said, tell me about the place at Spa when you went to one dinner and you went to the team dinner and not the management dinner. Didn't end well.
Well, it was 1970.
Yeah.
And first of all, in the 917, now being run by John Wire, Siffert doesn't come round on the first practice lap. Rodriguez comes in. Siffert is stopped on the side of the track with a flat tyre. So they put a wheel and a tyre and a jack and everything in Rodriguez's car, and off they go. They change it at the side of the road. Siffert comes in going crazy because it was on the master straight.
Yeah.
Even on the first lap, to be going pretty fast.
Yeah.
And they change all 4 wheels and tyres. It goes out. It happens again. Comes back in again, change all the four wheels, and they say, Herr Redman, now it is your turn. I said, there's something the matter. Go slowly. So out I go. Well, I did 3 laps, gradually building speed. The 4th lap, I'm flat out. No problem down the master thing. And bear in mind, we're coming into the kink, which is the farmyard, at 207 miles an hour. I'm going through it at 180. So I'm on the return straight, which is slightly uphill. And the corner at the end is a right-hander, flat out and blind, followed by a left, flat out and blind. So I turned into the right, the car went sideways. The left rear tyre come off the rim.
Jeez.
So I go, where? And then back the other way. Where? And I lost feeling, of where my actions, counter-steering, were in relation to the angle of the car.
Yeah, I bet.
I'd read in a motor racing book that in that situation, if you let go of the wheel, it would straighten itself. And I did. I let go of the wheel. And it went
Talk
straight.
about a Hail Mary. Jeez.
I got in the pits, Sivert fell on the floor laughing.
Did he
I
really?
said, what's the matter with you? He said, Brian, you're the colour of your overalls. So anyway, we win the race on the Sunday.
Do you?
And it's the fastest ever run. An average speed of over 149 miles an hour, including the pit stops and including some rain at the start.
Unbelievable.
And so that night, of course, the incredibly boring prize giving, where all the officials are thanking each other in some unintelligible language.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on. And I had Marion there with James, our son. And of course, James is 5. And, So about 10:30, the prize giving finishes. And Siffer says to me, Brian, we go and have a drink with the mechanics. I said, yeah, great idea. So I say to Marion, I'll drop you and James off at the hotel, and Siffert and I are going for a quick drink with the mechanics. What time will you be back? Midnight. 4 a.m.
4 a.m.
We arrived back.
Brian.
Siffert's doing spin turns in the gravel forecourt, showering all the windows in gravel, laughing. We couldn't walk upstairs, we'd crawl upstairs. And we're making a bit of a noise, and Marion wouldn't let me in. So the hotel manager was called, and it's a bit of... I can't go into all the gruesome details.
You don't need to.
But it finished up almost that I was locked out of the room stark naked, dripping in water. So Porsche were banned from the hotel.
Were they?
Yeah, so that's probably what David was referring
That's
to.
probably what David was referring to. That is a great story.
So,
Oh my! There was such a. That is a good story. I remember Dad and Jackie last year. Jackie looked at Dad. We had dinner at the Hotel de France, and he just, with that big smile he has, he goes, and they were talking about some girl back in the day, and he goes, Derek, it is lucky that there was none of the social media when we were racing. And of course, what a different world now. I mean, you were married the whole way through, like David was married the whole way through, but there were other drivers that were a little more free with their liberal with their affections,
yes,
Dad.
yes.
And they were, but there was no, but in general, you could travel the world. And I mean, Dad called back home once a week, because it was a pound a minute or something from South Africa. So he wouldn't, everyone was so much more frugal, weren't they? You didn't, now we FaceTime. You could FaceTime my mum in Cape Town this morning.
It's unbelievable. It is.
Just the amount of communication. So it must have meant that when you guys went to Tasman, went to Australia, went to South Africa, there must have been a boys on tour feel to it, really, and camaraderie.
Well, there was.
Camaraderie in what you were doing, right? The danger and the
Yes.
driving fast cars and exciting places. That, when you look at that, do you think that was a luckier era to be in than now?
I think it was, because there wasn't as much pressure. I mean, you look today how much pressure there is at every level. I mean, this weekend at Daytona, even in the lower classes or even races that aren't in the 24 hours, there's a lot of pressure. you know. There's so much known, everything's computerized, they're looking at it. We didn't know what lap times we were doing, and we never asked.
No.
I never asked a team manager, how did my lap time compare to Siffert's,
You never did, no.
No.
And That's an interest. Oh, the two things that come to mind. I remember when I was racing up until the mid 90s, really, when the live data started to really come in, you could kind of go off, or you could have a half spin, or you could, lock up under brakes, and they might say to you later, you lost a second or two on that lap, and you go, traffic.
Yes.
There was no. Now they go, why did you lift off? They get on the radio and say, is everything all right? And you go, traffic. They'll be like, no, there's no traffic near you. I'm looking at the board. Yeah. You can't hide anything.
No.
But now it's all it's so immediate. No, I was just thinking, when it comes to, the pressure, what was the pressure for you guys? Because you were racing with the top guys in the world who came from, you could be in Formula 1 minute, right? One weekend, you could be in a sports car race the next.
Yes.
There was it was a bit more liberal in a way, wasn't it?
Yes.
But there was still the pressure that if you were good, you get to drive the next week.
Yes. That was the pressure, really.
Yeah.
You either did the job or you didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think it's much worse today. Everything. The cost today.
It's going to cost you $250,000 a year for your kid to be good in karting.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
I mean, thank God my kid doesn't want it. Thank God James didn't want, really want it. I feel sorry for these kids. I mean, I really do. I think it's a wonderful way of life, isn't it? It's a great driving at the top. And getting paid to drive a car around in a circle, you can't really justify that as great for mankind. It's just, it's pretty singularly.
Yeah, that's the trouble, isn't it? I mean, it's
singularly
pretty
fun.
tough.
Yeah. Did the chuckle I got when I read the book, of course, was the fact that, and I'm desperate to say this word, you were a master baker, so to say. So how does the master baker come up does he still bake once in a while?
The master baker, who spent 3 years at catering college, has never laid a hand on a pan since.
Oh, really?
Much to my wife's disgust.
I bet. That's so funny.
There's not a week goes by for the last 60 years when Marianne doesn't say, well, you were trained, well, right.
Yeah. I guess the driving the van around was probably the highlight. Yeah.
Well, that was the mop business. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was a very, very keen car person. And before the war, he had a Fraser-Nash BMW 328.
That was a hell of a car.
And then straight after the war, a Bristol 400, which of course was really like a modified BMW 328.
Yeah.
And then a 401 and then an Aston Martin. And he did it all because his wife, my wife's mother's mother, had passed away when she was only 14. And she had a small bakery in Burnley, and that's where my grandpa lived. And then he'd worked for a company called the Patent Wringer Company in Burnley. Well, the Patent Wringer was a mop bucket with a cone in it and holes, where you squeeze.
Yeah, you squeeze it.
That was the Patent Wringer, invented in 1898. And he owned that company. He took over from Frank Ness, the founder.
Gosh.
And when Grandpa passed away, I bought it off my mother for £500. And it was then, he actually had an MGA when he died, coupe.
So cars, there were some nice cars.
Yes.
So what was the first one you were able to drive?
The first one that I drove was TR2 when I was 17, so I just passed my test. I'd never been over 50 miles an hour in my life. Yeah, so we're on this narrow country road going across to Beverley from Burnley, and we're in the TR2, and I'm driving. And he says, I'm doing about 50 miles an hour. That's as fastest I'd ever been. He says, send it on, lad, send it on. So I accelerate a bit, 60. It goes like this, 70, 80, 90. By this time, I'm feeling rather nervous. 100. And he shouts, we've done it! Fastest I've ever been on this road.
Really? Oh, that's cute.
Yeah. So...
The thing that came through in the book, which I quite enjoyed, was I just know you as like nice, gentle Brian, and you're such a gentleman, and that's sort of everyone views you as such, which is quite a nice way to be thought of. But behind the wheel, you were a tough cookie. You were a tough man behind the wheel.
Well, I mean, the only reason for going racing is to win, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that's why you're all there, trying to win. Just a couple of weeks ago, a driver called Warwick Brown, an Australian, he made a very nice compliment. He said, "Brian, you're the nicest guy dead, except when he gets behind the wheel." He said something. Yeah. But yes, I had a, very lucky career with the Formula 5000 cars in the 70s with Carl Haas and Jim Hall of Chaparral. And so it's been interesting. 2 years with Ferrari, turned down a Formula 1 Ferrari drive in 68.
Why did that happen?
The 68, turning it down?
Yeah.
I got a call from engineer Mauro Fugeri in 68.
Famous. Very famous guy.
He said, "Brian, come to Maranello and we test at Modena."
Yeah.
So I get there and we're testing Formula 2. And Mauro Fugeri says, "Brian," at lunchtime, he says, "over there, under the trees in the raincoat." I said, "Yes." He said, "This is Signor Ferrari." What he's saying is, go faster.
Really?
So then I go to the Nurburgring South Circuit. Jackie Hicks is the team leader and Formula 2. The South Circuit, as you may know, is similar to the main circuit, but it's shorter, so it's probably 5 miles instead of 14. And so I go whistling round in practice, and I come in about 15 minutes from the end of qualifying on Saturday. Why you stop? I said, "I've gone as fast as I can." "Brian," he says, "go out and try harder. You're in 10th place. So out I go. I try harder. I go 10th of a second quicker. I'm in 4th place, which is where I'd been all along. Race comes, 5th lap, behind Kurt Ahrens. I'm in 4th place. And he put a wheel in the dirt. Showered in stones. A stone came through my goggle. He hit me what I thought was in the eye, and I stopped, threw my goggles off, threw up and set off again back to the pits for 4 miles or so. And why you stop? I said, he says, okay, go. I said, "Oh, go. I haven't any spare." He said, "Take X's." And he throws me these dark green goggles, which were okay in the sunlight, not great under the trees. And I drove like a maniac, and I set the fastest lap and finished 4th, about half a second behind your dad in 3rd.
Did he? Yeah. When you say drove like a maniac, it's interesting because there's moments, aren't there, in a driver's career when you know that you're driving above.
Yes.
You're almost out of in a different level. Was that one of those moments when you?
Yes.
It's like risk doesn't take a factor. You just have supreme confidence.
Yes.
How can we do that? How does that happen? What was that?
I mean, in this case, it was a combination of the urging from Fugeri and of course knowing that it was a very important drive.
Yeah.
As you go through your life and career, there are certain days, certain times when you know that if you do well, then everything's going to be good, and if you don't, it's not. Yeah. So I got back into the hotel, the sport hotel, after this race. I just sat on the bed for like 15 minutes like this. And I go down to dinner. Fugeri disappears. He comes back. He says, "Brian, I speak with Enzo Ferrari. For the rest of the year, you drive a Formula 2. And in September to Monza, Formula Uno." And I said, "No, thank you."
Really?
He says, "What do you mean, no, thank you?" I said, "If I drive for Ferrari, I'll be dead by the end of the year."
No.
So, after this stupid retirement to South Africa and this difficult season with the Formula 5000 car in 71 for Sid Taylor, and plus the accident on the Targo Florio, the burns. I mean, actually about 4 weeks after the accident, I drove again in a 5000 race, but my helmet was catching on the burn area up here, and the surgeon said, "You must stop for 8 weeks, nothing." Yeah. So I bought a caravan, towed it through south of France, and we're on a campsite one Monday morning, and I'd been up to get washed and shaved, do my teeth, and I'm coming back down to the caravan where Marion and James are, And an English guy who knew I was interested in racing, he said, "Oh," he said, "do you know that guy who was killed yesterday?" I said, "Who?" He said, Rod. I said, "Rodriguez?" He said, "Yeah, Rodriguez." I said,
No, Christ.
I was in tears. Got back to the trailer. The caravan Marion said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Pedro's dead." And then, of course, we get back to England in probably end of September, and I'm watching the Brands Hatch non-championship Formula One race, and I see Sifford gone.
They must have been so tough. It must have been tough. Deeply tough moments. Jesus. Yeah,
Well,
that's...
It's the luck of the draw.
It is the luck of the draw. And isn't it funny when you're on track with them, you do everything you could to beat them, right? Every single thing you could do. But in the same moment, you'd share a drink in the evening.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
It's like war, but not on the... war, the British pilots would come back to their base and the Germans would go back to their base.
Yes.
But I'm sure in another world, they would have had a drink that night before going back up in the air.
Yes.
If it was possible. It's a bit like racing, isn't it?
Well, after that very difficult 71 at the end, so I've had the accident, everybody's been killed, Sifford and Rodriguez are dead, and it's like... And Sid Taylor, who was driving 5004, borrowed a BRM Can-Am car from BRM.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been built for George Eaton, the Canadian millionaire. And so we go to Imola, and it rained, and the car was great in the rain, and I lapped the field. And the field included a factory Ferrari, Clay Regazzoni. And Mauro Fugari came up to me and said, "Brian." I said, "Yes." He said, "What are you doing next year?"
Mm-hmm.
So I'm back with Ferrari for 2 years.
Jeez.
But the very first race was Kyalami, 9 hours, in November of 1971. And the team is Mario Andretti and Jackie Hicks in one car, and Clay Regazzoni and myself in the other. And I put it on pole, partially because I knew some stuff about Kyalami, which was worth about half a second a lap. So... Anyway, we win the race. Hicks and Andretti had some minor problem early on. And anyway, there we are at the Kyalami Ranch, the hotel. I wasn't staying there. I was staying with Paddy Driver, a well-known local racer and motorcycle racer. He's about 20 miles away. And he'd lent me this diabolical Kawasaki 3-cylinder 2-stroke. So now it's midnight. We're at the Kyalami Ranch, where it's all individual rondavels, with straw roofs. Everybody's gone to bed except me and Regazzoni. And Clay says, Brian, we have some fun with Mario." I said, yeah.
Yeah, how about...
So he lights a newspaper and throws it into Mario's rondavel. Well, he got the wrong room. It wasn't Mario. It was a businessman, had no interest in racing. The police came.
There.
Regazzoni had to be smuggled out of South Africa the next day. And I rode back 20 miles on this Kawasaki. All I remember were getting an enormous wobble going down a hill in a dip, like this, the bike does this, and then falling off in Paddy's rosebush. That's all I remember about it.
Jeez.
But it was the beginning of 2 great years.
Isn't that fantastic? Yeah, I can't. That is so funny. So obviously you talk about Sifford and Andretti and Hicks and all these incredible guys. Who on the day was the guy you went, this is... to me, it's because we obviously, you never race tete-a-tete with Sterling, with Fangio, with Lewis, with, your era was your era. Who was... 2 questions. One, I guess, or 2 things come to mind is, who was that guy? And also, how did you also go into the race some mornings going, today I'm as good as them and I can beat them in every way? Because there's
I never really looked at it like that. I just tried to do the best that I could with what I had on that particular day, even if there was something wrong with it. You just did the best, and really, and I'm sure Mario would tell you that the reason I beat him for 2 years to the Formula 5000 championship was because I had more reliability, which I did.
He was good though, wasn't he?
Oh, fantastic!
He was fantastic.
Yes,
and versatile as a driver.
Fantastic. Yes. At Mossport in 1975, just before the race, I saw that Mario had lowered his rear wing for more speed up that long uphill straight. And I said to Jim Hall, I said, look, he said, do you want to do the same? I said, no. I said, I'll leave it. Well, before the race, we're all driving. Well, the race was delayed for an hour and a half. Why? Broken beer bottles on the track. Because
Crazy.
the Canadians know how to party.
Yeah.
So now we're driving an hour and a half late on a convertible. I'm with Mario on the last one. And we drive around turn 3, and there on the left-hand side, there's a man and a lady stark naked, lying on their backs like this. So we drive past, and then Mario shouts at our driver, hey, go back. So we go back, and we stop. We're looking at these two. Mario shouts, hey! And the guy opened one eye. Mario shouts, what time's the race start? And this guy goes, what race? Well, in the race, he pulled 6 or 7 car lengths up the straight every lap. And I could close up by the
But
start.
under braking and through the corners,
past.
you could do it, yeah.
Couldn't get past. And
Wow.
I finished like half a car's length behind or something.
But who was the guy? So was Mario one of the best you ever drove
yes,
against? Really?
yes, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, he was always. I think, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this. He was a bit harder on the car.
Yeah.
I think my lengthy long distance experience, made me a bit easier
Yeah.
on the car. He had a lot more mechanical problems, and he stole my chief mechanic at the end of 1973, Jim Chapman.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He went to Vels Parnelli to be Mario's chief mechanic.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that was a major effort. In fact, it was a change of scene completely when USAC joined the SCCA in 1974. So suddenly we've got Mario, Bobby Unser, Al Unser, Gordon Jonko,
Yeah.
Johnny Rutherford, and others. All, Indy winners, everything. It was funny at Pocono in 75, we had a new car, the Lola T400. Wasn't any good. It was slow. And Jim Hall said to me, what's the matter? I said, I've no idea. Is it pushing? I said, no. Oversteer? I said, no. Why is it so slow? I don't know. I call it... So anyway, by coincidence or by some miracle, the race was rained off. It was cancelled. And in that 4 weeks, until it was re-held, Carl Haas, who was the Lola importer, and he'd sold 4 or 5 of these new T400s, Vels Parnelli, for Mario and Alan, so they had 2. Epi Wheats had one. They were also. He bought a damaged T332 from last year, sent it to Chaparral, and so 4 weeks later, I came back with last year's car and won the race.
Isn't that fantastic?
But during, because the first heat race, I was like 8th or 9th,
Yeah.
where I'd qualified in the first event. And so now I'm anxious to get to the front. And I come up behind Bobby Unser. He's in a Dan Gurney Eagle. There's a tight left-hander behind the oval part. There's plenty of room, so I go whistling through. And Bobby comes up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know him, never met him. He said, Redman, what the hell you do, passing me going into that turn like that? I said, well, you have plenty of room. He said, is that the way you road racers do it? I said, yeah. He said, okay, now I know.
Really? That's good. Yeah, when the NASCAR drivers started doing the road races, there was all that sort of talk about, well, they just only can turn left. They can't, they don't have any other skills. And then when you watch some of them, they're just good drivers are good drivers, right? A great driver is a great
absolutely.
driver.
Yes.
Do you believe
absolutely.
that they
Yes.
could? I mean, it's like I actually asked David this. You look at, it's easy to say a Lewis or a Raikkonen or a, you go, oh, how Verstappen, oh, it's the cars and it's the way they are. But you put them in any era, they would be
Yes.
bloody good, wouldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. It makes no difference. I mean, they're always in every era. There are 1 or 2 outstanding drivers. In my era, Jim Clark, who I knew from his early racing days and my early racing days at Rufford near York when he came down from Scotland.
Yeah.
And I got to know him well in 67 because when I was doing Formula 2. And he came up to me when the first time he spoke to me, actually. I'd seen him several times, of course. Well, he came up to me and said, "Brian, that's a very quick little car you've got there." My Lola T100, as he lapped me.
Did he really? Yeah.
But, I'd try to cling on, to do what he was doing and learn. And I'd eventually had to back off a bit. But yes, fantastic.
I wonder what he would have gone on, how many championships he'd have gone on to win.
Yes.
Because he was only just, even though he was at the top, he was only just at the top, right? I mean,
yes. When he died,
so much more
in
to
1968,
win.
I was just about to get into the John Wyer GT40 at Brands Hatch, and it was raining, pouring with rain, and I'm really nervous. And this journalist came up to me and said, "You heard about Jimmy, mate?" "Thank you."
Yeah, you didn't sit on Twitter, did you? Like now, you had to rely on the news getting back.
Yeah.
Did you go out?
Well, what am I going to do? As discussed before, you either do it or you don't do it.
And there's someone else waiting, isn't there? There's a lot of talk about what happened that day, isn't there? What happened because Dad was behind, and he heard a misfire, and thought or Jimmy had told him it was misfiring the day before, and Beaky Sim said it was something else with the was it a Targo? I mean, it's crazy, really. What was the car that you felt the most vulnerable in? Was it the 970? Was it?
Yes, probably the 917. Although the 9083 built only for the Targo Florio and the Nurburgring, when I first saw it, it was the winter 1969. So Porsche have just won the World Championship for the first time, with Sifford and I winning 5 of the 10 races. There was a Christmas party, and the engineers said to me, "Hey Redman, would you like to see the new 9083? I said, "Yeah." So I get in it. I couldn't believe it. My feet were in front of the front wheels. So when I got out, the engineer said, "Redman, what do you think of the new 9083? I said, "I think it's a very good car for Douglas Bader." But it was a fantastic car. And knowing what we know now, all these years later, in fact, not, we would have known much earlier, the 9083, this little short, based on the hill climb car, would have been faster at Spa than the 908 Longtail. Because in 1969, Sifford and I won in the Longtail, and I got fastest lap. Only a year and a bit later, in the Chevron B16 Spider, with a 1.8 litre Cosworth FVC engine, went 3 seconds faster, with a top speed of 160 miles an hour, compared to the 908 Longtail of 200 miles an hour. But the cornering, So the 9083 would have been 5 or 6 seconds a lap faster than the Longtail 908 built for the long high-speed circuit. So.
I guess you're in a unique position and you must sometimes think about it when you're at these concours events, and there's all these very wealthy people with their beautiful, they own the race cars and they own the Ferraris, and people like us don't have the money to own them, the cars you used to drive. But the one thing they give their right nut for is to have met Enzo, right? To have walked into the Ferrari factory, or to have been driving with Porsche in the heyday of the 917. So I think there's a lot of that's the connection. That's why you guys are so important to this car culture. Is you're the only ones that remember what it was actually like. And as you were talking, I was thinking, you're also one of those few guys that walked through the gates of the Ferrari factory and have walked through the gates of the Porsche factory. What was the biggest cultural difference between going to Ferrari and going to Porsche?
There wasn't really so much difference when I drove for Ferrari, because the team manager was Peter Shetty. A driver.
Yeah.
And he was the team manager. And so the Ferrari team with the 312 PB in 1972 and 3 was very well organised. There was none of that crazy, throwing wrenches and all this stuff. No, it was very good. At the Nurburgring in 1973 with the Ferrari, I'm driving the Jackie X, and Carlos Patches with Arturo Mezzario, very mercurial, little small guy, and he and Dix didn't get on very well. And so before the race, It was Jacopo Calleri who was the manager that weekend. And he said, if the Ferrari is leading at the halfway point, then the other car must not pass. So what happens? X and I are leading at the halfway point. Right in front of the pits, Mazzario comes flying past. Now they're battling for 2 laps, they're flat out. And so Mazzario had to stop for fuel just before the end. And he was ordered out of the car, out, and he wouldn't get out. He gripped the steering wheel, put his head on the wheel, like this. And they forced his fingers off the wheel and hauled him out. And he wouldn't come onto the podium. Nix and I won, and Carlos Paci and Mazzario was second. But only Carlos came on the podium.
There's a photograph. I think there's a photograph in the book, isn't there?
Yeah,
of the 3 of you on there. Yeah. God, how good was Jackie? He was
great.
Was he?
Fantastic, really. How he never became World Formula One champion, I'll never know.
Yeah.
He was so calm, and of course young. He was 8 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And so quiet. And when the first race at Kyle Army 9 Hours, November 1967, he walked across the track. It was a Le Mans start. So by the time we got going, we're nearly a lap behind. And then 7 or 8 laps into the race, he stopped. There was something wrong, and it was a fuel gauge, oil pressure gauge, that was all. But very, very good. And at Spa-Francorchamps, pouring with rain, admittedly, it's his home circuit, and yes, he'd won the race in the morning, the saloon car race in a Mustang, I think. So off they go, start of the race. Jackie comes past at the end of the first lap, disappears through a rouge. Now you can't see him or hear him. Everybody thinks there's been a big accident and the whole field is held up. No. In second place comes, I think it was Vic Elford in a Porsche 908, 38 seconds behind. So
I think I read that you said that was like the best display of superior driving you've ever seen.
Well, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And some years later, John Wyer wrote a book, and in it he said Redman did a adequate job, although he was 10 seconds a lap slower than X. So I rang John. I said, John, that's a bit unfair. He said, Redman, why? I said, well, your instructions were to maintain the gap. And the gap, when I took over after the first stint with X, was 1 lap. We were a lap ahead after the first stint.
Yeah, so you didn't need to do more. When you look at the guys racing sports cars now, and you look at Formula One and everything, do you think you would have fit in today's era?
I don't really think so. No, I don't know. The trouble is, I'm a bit lazy. I prefer the easy way out, which is partly why I chose to drive with Siffert in '69, because at the end of the first race at Daytona, Rico Steinemann, the team manager, said to me, Brian, would you like to be number 1 in your own car and choose your co-driver, or will you go as number 2 to Siffert? And I knew that if I went as number 2 to Siffert, I'd get none of the publicity. It would all be Siffert. But I also thought we'd win more races, which we did.
Yeah.
So,
there's something to being number 1, isn't there? Also, I think that if you'd been born 20 years later, you'd have still probably wanted to do it. It would have just been a different
yes.
a different thing. The only thing I think that's off-putting now is the level of fitness that everyone has to have. I mean, I'm really glad that, I kept fit, but I wasn't manic about it. I mean, now I'm looking on everyone's Instagram between the race at Daytona on Sunday, their qualifying race, and going to the track tomorrow. They're doing like half marathons and crap. It's unbelievable. Everyone does triathlons and 100-mile bike rides. It's quite a pressure.
Well, the first time that the ugly subject of exercise came up was 1967. And there was some talk about exercising. And I asked Jimmy Clark at a Formula 2 race in France. I said, Jimmy, do you do any exercise? He said, hi, Brian. He said, I exercise every day. I said, what do you do? He said, I lift my leg to get into bed at night.
Is that what he said?
So I've followed it ever since. Been good advice.
Well, as we wrap up, I was just thinking, as you sit up here on your balcony, thinking back, because there's always, you can't have regrets really, can you? Because you did some amazing things, and everyone would like to have made more money. And where were the $5 million contracts when, although Sterling was having all those big money contracts, wasn't he, when everyone else wasn't? Do you look back on it as a life well led? Are you not many stones unturned?
In many ways, yes. As you mentioned, the money. I never argued about money. I never asked for any amount of money. And so in 1968, 69 and 70, winning or being part of the World Championship winning teams, the Manufacturers' Championship, I made $1,000 a race for Le Mans, Sebring and Daytona, and $750 for all the others. So, and I never asked for more. I never did anything. Ferrari in 72, the first time that they ever paid their sports car racing driver was 72. We had a very strong team. There was like £25,000 in 72. That was big money.
Yeah.
It was Andretti, Ickx, Regazzoni, Patsy, Carlos Reutemann, Mazzarrio, Regazzoni, great big team. And that was the first time. And then in America in Formula 5000, I got $5,000 a race guaranteed, and then about not quite 45% of the prize money, if there was prize money.
Yeah.
But it wasn't much, although the first time we came to America with a Formula 5000 car was 1972, after having this miserable year in 71 with the McLaren M18. I'd persuaded Derek Bennett of Chevron to build a Formula 5000 car.
Yeah.
It's the only racing car I ever bought. I said, can you build one? How long and how much? He said, yes, 10 weeks and whatever it cost me. And I paid Derek £3,000 for the chassis. Sid Taylor put the team together, the engine, the gearbox, engine from Alan Smith in Derby. And it broke the Oulton Park lap record on its first time out, which was typical of Derek Bennett's designs. And it won the first two races. So Sid Taylor shouts, we're going to America, $20,000 for first place at Watkins Glen. So we shoved the Chevron on a trailer, open trailer, in Liverpool, shove it to New York. We buy a $500 station wagon in New York, tow it up to Watkins Glen. I'm leading by 40 seconds from Graham McRae with 7 laps to go and $20,000.
You can thinking of it, you can see it.
The battery went flat.
Oh, Brian.
And then the last race of the year at Riverside, California, I'm looking to overtake Sam Posey, who was in a Surtees TS8, and it's the last lap. And we're coming down to turn 9. And I'm in his slipstream, so we're doing about 170, and I'm looking to see if he's going to go down or up. I'm going to go the other way. Yeah. And I'm so light and closing like this, and suddenly the back of his car comes at me. And I swerve to miss him. So I win the race. There's a protest. I've overtaken under the yellow flag. The chief steward comes to me, and in a strong Lancashire accent, he says, now then, Brian, lad. He said, I'm Joe Smith from Accrington. Accrington was 7 miles from where I lived in Burnley. I didn't know him. He said, as one Lancashire lad to another, didst thou see yellow flag or not? I said, no, I didn't. He said, right, lad, you're the winner.
No, did he? Isn't that great?
We got fined $100. And after the race, this gentleman came up to me, took an unlit cigar out of his mouth. He said, Brian, he said, I'm Carl Haas. I'm the Lola importer for North America, and I'm teaming up with Jim Hall of Chaparral Cars next year. Would you like to drive for us?
And that was the start of that. Bingo. Pleasure. Thank you. I've loved it. Thank you so much. We'll have to do a part 2.